The bullet whizzed past Willa Patterson's ear, so close she could feel the displaced air, and she dropped her leather journal into the dusty street of Jackson, Wyoming, as strong hands grabbed her waist and yanked her behind a water trough. "Stay down," the cowboy growled, his body shielding hers as two more shots rang out across the spring afternoon in 1885. Willa's heart hammered against her ribs, not just from fear but from the sudden proximity to this stranger whose broad shoulders blocked out the sun. She could smell leather and sage and something undeniably masculine that made her breath catch despite the danger. The shooting stopped as quickly as it began. Willa heard the thunder of hooves retreating down Main Street, followed by shouts from the sheriff and his deputies giving chase. The cowboy stayed pressed against the trough, his hat pulled low, one hand still stretched protectively across her shoulders. "You can let go now," Willa said, trying to steady her voice. "I think they're gone." The man pulled back slowly, his gray eyes scanning the street before they landed on her face. He was younger than she had first thought, maybe 25 or 26, with a strong jaw covered in a few days' worth of stubble and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. Something in those eyes made her think he had seen too much for his years. "You hurt?" he asked. "No, thanks to you." Willa smoothed her dark green traveling dress and looked around for her journal. It lay open in the dirt, pages fluttering in the breeze. She scrambled forward to retrieve it before the wind could scatter her carefully penned verses across Wyoming. The cowboy got there first, picking up the leather-bound book with surprising gentleness for such rough hands. He brushed the dust off before handing it to her, and Willa caught him glancing at the exposed page where her latest poem sprawled in blue ink. "You write?" he asked. "I'm a poet, or trying to be." Willa clutched the journal to her chest, feeling oddly exposed. "Most people think it's foolish." "Words are powerful things," he said simply. "Nothing foolish about that." He tipped his hat. "Kade Thompson, Madam, Willa Patterson." She studied him more closely now that the immediate danger had passed. He wore typical cowboy gear, weathered but well-maintained, with a Colt revolver strapped to his hip and saddlebags slung over one shoulder. "Do you know what that was about?" "The shooting?" Kade's expression darkened. "The Dalton gang. Been causing trouble from here to Montana for the past 6 months. Robbed the bank 2 towns over yesterday." He glanced down the street where the sheriff and his men had disappeared. "They're getting bolder." "Are you a lawman?" Cattle Hand was bringing a herd through to the northern ranges when we heard about the robbery. Kade hesitated, then added, "But I've had dealings with the Daltons before. Personal ones." Something in his tone told Willa not to press further. She dusted off her skirts again and looked around Jackson's Main Street, where townspeople were slowly emerging from cover. The general store owner was sweeping broken glass from his window. A woman was comforting her crying child. The peaceful afternoon had been shattered in seconds. "Are you just passing through?" Kade asked. "Actually, I'm trying to find someone who can take me to Denver. I came here from Boston 3 weeks ago to visit my sister, but she got word that her husband took ill back east and had to leave suddenly. She was supposed to accompany me to Denver, where my poems are being considered for publication." Willa tried to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Now I'm stranded here trying to find safe passage." Kade frowned. "Denver's a long journey from here. 6-7 days on horseback through rough country. Longer by wagon. I know. I've asked at the stage office, but the next run is not for another 2 weeks, and I can't wait that long. My meeting with the publisher is in 9 days. Willa met his eyes. "I've asked several guides, but they all want more money than I have, or they refuse to take a woman traveling alone. Smart of them. Those trails are dangerous even for armed men. So I'm discovering." Willa sighed, looking at her journal. 6 months of work, her best verses, and the chance of a lifetime. All of it slipping away because she could not find a way to travel 200 miles through the wilderness. Kade studied her for a long moment, something working behind those gray eyes. "I'm heading to Denver myself. Was planning to rest here a day or two, then move on." Willa's heart jumped. "You are? Got business there? Been putting it off, but I suppose it's time." He shifted his saddlebags. "I travel fast and I travel light. It would not be easy." "I can ride," Willa said quickly. "And I do not need much. Just my bag and my writing supplies." "And you would trust a stranger you just met to take you across Wyoming and Colorado?" It was a fair question. Willa looked at this man who had thrown himself between her and bullets without hesitation, who handled her journal like it mattered, who spoke of words as powerful things. She thought of her careful Boston upbringing, all the rules about propriety and caution her mother had drilled into her. Then she thought of her poems, the dreams she had nurtured through lonely winters of writing by candlelight, and the chance that was slipping away. "You saved my life," she said. "That counts for something." Kade's mouth quirked, almost a smile. "Or maybe I'm the kind of man who gets shot at by outlaws. Might want to consider that before you throw your lot in with me. The Daltons were robbing the bank. You just happened to be here. This time." But Kade seemed to come to some decision. "All right. I can take you to Denver, Miss Patterson. But we leave tomorrow at dawn and you do exactly what I say when I say it. The trail is no place for arguments." "Agreed." Willa extended her hand, and after a moment's surprise, Kade shook it. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but careful, as if he were conscious of his own strength. "You have a horse?" he asked. "I can rent one from the stable. Get a good one. We'll be pushing hard." Kade glanced at the sky, calculating. "Meet me at the north end of town 1 hour before sunup. Bring only what you can carry on horseback. Wear practical clothes and sturdy boots." "I understand. And Miss Patterson," Kade's expression was serious. "Once we leave Jackson, we're committed. Can't turn back if the going gets rough." "I will not ask you to turn back," Willa promised. She watched him nod and walk away toward the saloon, his long stride easy and confident. Only after he disappeared through the swinging doors did she realize she was still holding her journal pressed against her racing heart. That evening, Willa packed and repacked her bag, trying to decide what was essential. She settled on 2 changes of clothes, her writing supplies, the manuscript of poems, and a small daguerreotype of her family. Everything else she left with the boarding house owner to be shipped back to Boston if she did not return for it. She lay awake most of the night, alternating between excitement and terror at what she was about to do. Traveling alone through the wilderness with a man she barely knew went against every social convention she had been raised with. Her mother would be horrified. Her father would likely disown her if word got back to Boston. But Willa had not traveled 2,000 miles from home just to give up when opportunity beckoned. She had spent 23 years being the dutiful daughter, the proper young lady, the girl who wrote secret poems in her room and dreamed of a larger life. This was her chance. She rose before dawn, dressed in her most practical traveling outfit, a split riding skirt and sturdy jacket, and pinned her dark hair into a tight braid. The boarding house was silent as she crept down the stairs and out into the cold pre-dawn air. Kade was already waiting at the north edge of town with 2 horses. One was his own, a large roan gelding with intelligent eyes. The other was a smaller bay mare, saddled and ready. "I took the liberty of getting you a mount," Kade said as she approached. "Better than the rental nags at the stable. This is Penny. She's got stamina and a good temperament." "I can pay you back," Willa began, but Kade waved her off. "Consider it part of the arrangement. I need you on a horse that can keep up." He helped her secure her bag to the saddle, his movements efficient. "You know how to check your cinch." "Show me." He demonstrated, patient and thorough, making sure she understood how to check that the saddle was secure. In the growing light, Willa could see he had shaved and looked more rested, though there was still a wariness in his eyes as he scanned the quiet street. "We'll ride hard for the first few hours, put some distance between us and Jackson," he explained. "The Daltons might still be in the area, and I would rather not run into them." "You said you had personal dealings with them," Willa ventured as she mounted Penny. The mare stood steady beneath her, which she appreciated. Kade swung into his own saddle with easy grace. "They killed my brother 2 years ago, over in Montana. He was a deputy, tried to stop them from robbing a train." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Gunned him down in the street while his wife and baby watched." "I'm so sorry," Willa said softly. "It's why I learned to shoot." Kade gathered his reins. "Swore I would never be helpless again, never watch someone I cared about die without being able to do something." He met her eyes. "I am telling you this so you understand. If we run into trouble on this trail, I will handle it. Your job is to stay safe and stay alive. Understood?" "Understood." They rode out of Jackson as the sun crested the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The town fell away behind them quickly, replaced by rolling grassland that stretched toward the distant peaks. The morning air was sharp and clean, scented with sage and pine. Willa had ridden before, but never like this. Kade set a steady pace that ate up the miles, not quite a gallop but faster than a comfortable trot. Penny moved smoothly beneath her, responding to the lightest touch on the reins. The landscape unfurled around them in vast sweeps of space and sky that made Boston's crowded streets seem like a distant dream. They rode for 3 hours before Kade called a halt near a stream. Willa's legs were shaking as she dismounted, muscles protesting the unfamiliar exercise. Kade noticed but said nothing, simply showed her how to loosen Penny's cinch and let the horse drink without foundering. "We will rest for 20 minutes, he said. "Water for you is in the canteen on your saddle. There is jerky in the saddlebag if you are hungry." Willa sank onto a flat rock and took a long drink. The water was metallic and lukewarm but wonderful. She watched Kade move around the horses with practiced efficiency, checking hooves and adjusting straps. Everything he did was deliberate, purposeful. "How long have you been a cattle hand?" she asked. "Since I was 15. My father had a small ranch in Montana, but we lost it after a bad winter. I hired on with various outfits, learned the trade." Kade glanced at her. "You are from Boston, born and raised. My father is a banker." Willa smiled wryly. "Very respectable, very proper. He thinks poetry is a waste of time." "What does your mother think?" "She thinks I should focus on finding a husband." Willa pulled out a piece of jerky and bit into it, grimacing at the toughness. "They had high hopes for me and the son of father's business partner. Very suitable, very boring." "You didn't want him." "I wanted more than a suitable marriage and a proper house and the same life my mother has." Willa looked out at the endless sky. "Is that selfish?" "It is honest," Kade said. He sat down on another rock, his body angled so he could watch both her and the trail behind them. "And there is nothing wrong with wanting more." They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. The stream burbled over smooth stones. Willa found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Depends on the question." "Why are you going to Denver? You said you had business there." Kade was quiet for a long moment. "My sister-in-law, my brother's widow. She moved there after he died, took the baby and went to live with her parents. I have not seen my nephew in 2 years. I keep meaning to visit, but something always stops me." "What stops you?" The fear that when he looks at me, he will see his father, that I will see my brother. Kade's jaw tightened. Daniel was the better man, the good one. I'm just the one who lived. Willa's chest ached at the pain in those simple words. I do not think your nephew would see it that way, and I am certain your sister-in-law would be glad to see you. Maybe. Kade stood abruptly. Time to move. We have a lot of ground to cover before nightfall. They remounted and continued south, the sun climbing higher until the day grew warm. The landscape began to change, grassland giving way to rockier terrain dotted with juniper and pine. Kade navigated confidently, following trails that were sometimes barely visible to Willa's untrained eye. Around midday, they stopped again to rest the horses and eat a quick meal of bread and cheese that Kade had packed. Willa's body was starting to protest in earnest now, muscles she did not know she had making themselves known, but she refused to complain. She had agreed to this journey and she would see it through. How are you holding up? Kade asked, watching her move stiffly. I'm fine, Willa lied, his mouth twitched. You are a terrible liar, Miss Patterson. Then I am fine but sore, better, honest at least. He pulled a small tin from his saddlebag. Liniment. It will help with the muscle aches. You can use it tonight when we make camp. Thank you. Willa accepted the tin, touched by his thoughtfulness. They pressed on through the afternoon, the miles rolling past in a blur of landscape and movement. Willa found herself falling into the rhythm of the ride, her body learning to move with Penny's gait. She watched Kade ahead of her, noting how he constantly scanned their surroundings, how his hand never strayed far from his gun. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Kade led them off the main trail toward a cluster of rocks and cottonwood trees. A small spring bubbled up among the stones, creating a natural oasis. We will camp here tonight, he announced. Water for the horses and good cover. Willa dismounted carefully, her legs nearly buckling. Kade was beside her in an instant, his hand steadying her elbow. Easy, he said. First day is always the hardest. I will adjust, Willa insisted, though she was not entirely sure she believed it. Kade showed her how to properly unsaddle Penny and rub her down, how to hobble the horses so they could graze without wandering, how to gather firewood and build a small fire that would not throw too much smoke. He moved with the ease of long practice, and Willa tried to commit everything to memory. As darkness fell, they sat on opposite sides of the small fire, eating beans and bacon that Kade cooked in a battered pan. The food was simple but tasted wonderful after the long day. Above them, stars began to emerge in impossible numbers, more than Willa had ever seen in the city. It's beautiful, she breathed, staring up at the glittering expanse. One of the better things about sleeping under the sky, Kade agreed. He poured coffee from a dented pot and handed her a cup. Get used to it. We will be doing this for the next week. Willa sipped the bitter coffee and watched the fire dance. Can I ask you something else? You are full of questions. Occupational hazard. Poets need to understand people. She smiled. You said words are powerful things. How does a cattle hand come to think that way? Kade stared into the fire, the flames reflecting in his eyes. My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father. She taught Daniel and me to read when we were young, made us memorize poetry and Shakespeare. She said that a man who could not appreciate words was only half alive. He paused. She died when I was 12. Fever took her one winter, but I never forgot what she said. She sounds wonderful, she was. Kade looked at Willa across the fire. So what do you write about? Your poems? Everything, nothing, whatever moves me. Willa set down her coffee cup. Mostly I write about trying to understand my place in the world, about feeling trapped by expectations, about longing for something I cannot quite name. And Boston could not give you that. Boston wanted to give me exactly what I did not want. A prescribed life, a prescribed future. She met his eyes. Coming west was supposed to help me find clarity. Instead, I just feel more confused. About what? About whether I am brave or just foolish. About whether following my dreams is noble or selfish. Willa wrapped her arms around her knees. About what happens if I fail. Kade considered this. Seems to me that trying and failing takes more courage than never trying at all. Is that cowboy wisdom? Just common sense? He stirred the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night. You came all this way for your poetry. That counts for something. They fell silent, the night sounds filling the space between them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The horses shifted and snorted. The fire crackled and popped. I am going to write about this, Willa said suddenly. This journey, you, all of it. Kade looked startled. Me, you. The mysterious cowboy who saved my life and agreed to guide me through the wilderness. She smiled at his discomfort. Do not worry. I will change your name. Make sure you do. I do not need my reputation ruined by appearing in poetry. What reputation would that be? As a man who minds his own business and does not get involved in foolish ventures like this one. But there was warmth in his voice, almost teasing. Willa laughed, surprised by how natural it felt. Too late now. You are already involved. So I am. Kade stood and kicked dirt over the fire, banking it for the night. Get some sleep, Miss Patterson. We ride out at first light. He laid out bedrolls on opposite sides of the dying fire, giving her privacy to change into her nightdress behind a convenient rock. Willa used the liniment on her sore muscles, grateful for the relief, then burrowed into the blankets. The ground was harder than any bed she had ever slept in, but exhaustion pulled her down into darkness almost immediately. She woke once in the deep night to find Kade sitting up, rifle across his knees, watching the darkness beyond their camp. His vigilance should have frightened her, but instead she felt safe, protected. She drifted back to sleep with that thought warming her more than the blankets. Dawn came cold and bright. Willa woke to find Kade already moving, building up the fire and setting coffee to boil. Her muscles screamed protest as she sat up, but she forced herself to move, to fold her bedroll and help break camp. How are you feeling? Kade asked as he saddled the horses. Like I was trampled by cattle, Willa admitted, but I will manage. The second day is worse than the first, he warned. But after that, your body adapts. He was right. The second day of riding was torture, every movement agony. But Willa gritted her teeth and kept pace, refusing to slow them down. Kade seemed to understand, pushing hard but calling for breaks when she needed them without making her ask. They covered good ground that day, leaving Wyoming behind and entering northern Colorado. The landscape grew more dramatic, mountains rising like ancient sentinels on either side of their path. They saw other travelers occasionally, freight wagons and other riders, but Kade gave them all a wide berth. That night, they camped beside a small lake, its surface mirror smooth and reflecting the surrounding peaks. While Kade tended the horses and started a fire, Willa pulled out her journal and began to write, capturing the images and feelings of the past 2 days while they were still fresh. "What are you writing?" Kade asked when he noticed her bent over the pages. "Impressions, moments." Willa looked up. The way the mountains looked this morning, like they were carved from light, the feeling of being so small under such an enormous sky. "Can I hear some of it?" The request surprised her. Willa had shared her poetry with editors and her sister, but rarely with anyone else. Somehow, though, sharing with Kade felt right. She found a completed poem from earlier in the day and read, "The mountains stand like ancient kings, their crowns of snow and stone. They watch the paths of wandering things and guard what they have known. Beneath their gaze, I'm small and free, a word upon the page, a soul who's learning how to be beyond the gilded cage. Silence followed her words. Willa looked up nervously to find Kade staring at her with an expression she could not quite read. "That is what you wrote today?" he asked finally. "This afternoon, yes. It is rough, still needs polish. It is beautiful." He said it simply, like a fact. "Your publisher would be a fool not to want your work." Warmth flooded through Willa at the genuine praise. "Thank you. That means more than you know. I mean it." Kade stirred the pot of stew he was cooking. "You have a gift, Miss Patterson, for seeing things and putting them into words that make other people see them too." They ate dinner in comfortable silence, then sat by the fire as night fell. Willa noticed Kade had relaxed somewhat over the past 2 days, the constant wariness easing into something more like calm awareness. He told her stories about his life on the cattle drives, the places he had seen, the characters he had met in turn. She told him about Boston, about her childhood spent in a house full of books, about sneaking out to poetry readings in secret because her father disapproved, about the night she decided to come west, packing her bags in darkness and leaving a note for her parents that she hoped they would forgive. "You think they will?" Kade asked. "Forgive you, eventually?" "Maybe." Willa hugged her knees. "My mother will worry. My father will be angry. But I think, deep down, they will understand, or at least I hope they will. And if the publisher does not take your poems, what then? Then I will find another publisher and another after that." She met his eyes across the fire. "I did not come this far to give up at the first obstacle." "Good." Kade smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. "Stubbornness is useful out here." The third day dawned cloudy and cool. They rode through high country now, the trail winding through pine forests and across mountain meadows carpeted with wildflowers. Willa's body had adjusted to the constant riding, and she found herself able to appreciate the beauty around them without focusing solely on her discomfort. Around midday, Kade suddenly reined in his horse, holding up a hand for silence. Willa stopped beside him, her heart accelerating at the tension in his posture. "What is it?" she whispered. "Riders, coming up fast behind us." Kade scanned the trail ahead. "There, that ravine. We need to get off the trail now." They urged their horses forward at a gallop, racing for the narrow cut in the rocks that Kade had spotted. They had just reached cover when 3 riders appeared on the trail behind them, moving at a hard gallop. Willa recognized them immediately from the descriptions she had heard in Jackson. The Dalton gang. Her breath caught as Kade pulled her deeper into the ravine, his hand over Penny's nose to keep the mare quiet. The outlaws thundered past, intent on their own destination, not looking for trouble on the trail. But Willa had seen the guns strapped to their hips, the hard set of their faces. If they had been spotted, it would have been bad. "Are they gone?" she breathed after several tense minutes. Kade nodded slowly, his expression grim. "Heading south, probably looking for another bank to rob." He looked at her seriously. "We need to be more careful. They are getting too close. Maybe we should report them to a sheriff somewhere. By the time we reached a town with law, they would be long gone." Kade urged his horse back toward the trail. "Best thing we can do is stay out of their way and get you to Denver safely." They rode more cautiously after that. Kade's vigilance increased. That night, he insisted they camp without a fire, eating cold food in the darkness. Willa did not complain. The near miss had shaken her, reminding her that this journey was more dangerous than she had fully appreciated. "Tell me about Denver," she said as they sat in the darkness, trying to distract herself from the shadows. "Have you been there before?" "A few times." "It is a real city now, not just a mining town. Streets and buildings and culture." Kade's voice came out of the darkness. "Your publisher is there, Horace Whitman. He runs a small press that specializes in Western writers and poets." He saw some of my work in a Boston magazine and wrote to me, said he would like to see more. Willa wrapped her blanket tighter. The meeting is in 5 days. I have to be there. We will make it. We are making good time. Kade, Willa hesitated. Thank you for taking me, for keeping me safe. I know it is not easy having a greenhorn poet slowing you down. You are not slowing me down. There was a rustling as he shifted position. And you are not as green as you think. You have held up better than a lot of men I have known. Pride warmed her chest. That might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me. Then you have been talking to the wrong people. Willa smiled in the darkness, feeling something shift between them. They had started as strangers bound by necessity, but somewhere on this trail, they had become something more. Friends, perhaps. Or the beginnings of friendship, at least. The 4th day brought them through a mountain pass, the trail steep and treacherous. Kade guided them with patience, showing Willa how to lean back in the saddle on the descents, how to give the horses their heads and trust their footing. They crossed rushing streams swollen with snowmelt, navigated switchbacks that made Willa's stomach lurch, and climbed until the air grew thin and her lungs burned. But the views were worth it. From the pass, they could see for miles in every direction, an endless expanse of peaks and valleys stretching to the horizon. Willa wanted to stop and write, to capture the majesty in words, but Kade urged them on. Weather could change quickly at altitude, he explained, and they needed to get below the tree line before nightfall. They made camp that night in a sheltered valley, and Kade finally allowed a fire again. As Willa warmed her hands over the flames, she noticed him watching her with an odd expression. "What?" she asked. "Nothing, just thinking." "About what?" Kade poked at the fire. "About how you are different from what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone softer, maybe, someone who would complain more or demand to turn back." He met her eyes. "You are tougher than you look, Willa Patterson." It was the first time he had used her first name. The sound of it on his lips sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire. "I have learned something on this journey," Willa said softly. "I am stronger than I thought I was, braver than I knew." She held his gaze. "You have helped me see that. I have not done anything except keep you from getting lost or shot. You have done more than you know." Willa pulled out her journal. "May I read you something? A new poem I wrote today." "Please." She found the page, written during a rest stop while the mountains loomed above them. "I thought I knew what courage meant, a word upon a page, a concept learned and memorized, but distant from the stage. Now courage wears a weathered face and rides with quiet grace. It shields the weak with gentle strength and finds its proper place. I'm learning from the mountain paths and skies that stretch so wide that bravery is not lack of fear, but fear we walk beside." The silence that followed felt charged with something Willa could not name. When she finally looked up, Kade was staring at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "That is about me," he said quietly. "Yes. I am not brave, Willa. I am just a man doing what needs to be done. That is exactly what bravery is." She closed her journal. "You do not see yourself clearly, Kade Thompson. Maybe, or maybe you see things that are not really there because you are a poet and that is what poets do." But his voice was gentle, almost tender. That night, as Willa lay in her bedroll staring up at the stars, she had to admit the truth to herself. Something was happening between her and this quiet cowboy who had saved her life. Something that went beyond gratitude or simple attraction. She was beginning to understand him, to see the man beneath the guarded exterior. And what she saw drew her in ways she had not anticipated. The 5th day brought warmer weather as they descended from the high country into foothills covered with pine and aspen. They were making excellent time, Kade said. They would reach Denver with a day to spare before her meeting. They stopped for lunch beside a creek, letting the horses drink and graze. Willa washed her face in the cold water, feeling trail dust and sweat sluice away. When she looked up, she caught Kade watching her with that same intense expression from the night before. "What are you thinking?" she asked, emboldened by days of growing familiarity. "That you were right, about me not seeing things clearly." He moved closer, his boots crunching on the creek bank. "I have spent 2 years being angry. Angry at the Daltons for killing Daniel. Angry at myself for not being there to stop it. Angry at the world for being unfair. That is understandable, maybe, but anger is exhausting." Kade stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes. "These past few days, traveling with you, listening to your poems and your questions and your way of seeing the world, I have felt something else. Something lighter." "What?" Willa's heart was pounding. Hope, maybe, or possibility. He reached out slowly, giving her time to move away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek. "You make me want to be better than I am." "You are already better than you think," Willa breathed. For a moment they stood frozen, the creek babbling behind them, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Willa thought he might kiss her, wanted him to kiss her with a fierceness that surprised her. But Kade stepped back, breaking the spell. "We should keep moving," he said roughly. "Still have miles to cover." Willa nodded, her cheek still warm from his touch. As they rode that afternoon, she tried to sort through the tangle of emotions in her chest. She barely knew this man. They came from different worlds, wanted different things. And yet, something between them felt inevitable, like a story that had already been written and they were just living out the words. That evening, they camped in a meadow fragrant with sage and wildflowers. After dinner, Kade pulled out a harmonica and began to play, surprising Willa. The music was simple but haunting, melodies that spoke of loneliness and longing. "I didn't know you played," she said when he paused. "My mother taught me, said music was as important as words." He turned the harmonica over in his hands. "I have not played much since she died. But tonight felt right somehow." "Will you play more?" He did, and Willa found herself moving closer to the fire, closer to him, drawn by the music and the growing connection between them. When he finished, she applauded softly. That was beautiful, just simple tunes. Nothing is simple about creating beauty, whether with words or music or anything else. Willa hesitated, then made a decision. "Kade, I need to tell you something." "What?" "I have been writing about this journey, about you, but what started as observation has become something else." She took a breath. "I am developing feelings for you, real feelings, and I needed you to know that before we reached Denver." Kade went very still. The firelight played across his face, highlighting the strong bones and the scar through his eyebrow. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful. "Willa, you need to understand something. I am not a man built for your world. I have nothing to offer you except a hard life and uncertain prospects. I am not asking you to offer me anything. Maybe not, but I need you to think about what you are saying." He leaned forward. "You have a future in Denver, a publisher who wants your work, a chance to become the poet you dreamed of being. I am just a cowboy passing through your life. You are more than that to me. Am I, or am I just a convenient character in your adventure?" His words were harsh, but pain edged them. "In a week, you will be back in the world you belong to. I will be just a memory." "That is not true," Willa protested. "Isn't it?" Kade stood abruptly. "I am going to check the perimeter. Get some rest. We have an early start tomorrow." He walked off into the darkness, leaving Willa alone by the fire with tears stinging her eyes. She had been honest with him, opened her heart, and he had thrown it back at her. Because he did not feel the same way, or because he was afraid. She did not sleep well that night, and in the morning the easiness between them had vanished. They rode in silence, Kade's expression closed and distant. Willa wanted to reach out to him, to bridge the gap that had opened, but pride kept her silent. The 6th day passed in uncomfortable quiet. They were getting close to Denver now, the landscape showing signs of civilization. Farms and ranches dotted the valleys. They passed other travelers on roads that were actually maintained. The wilderness was giving way to settlement. That evening, they could see Denver in the distance, lights beginning to twinkle as dusk fell. Kade led them to a campsite a few miles outside the city, and they went through the now familiar routine of caring for the horses and setting up camp. "We will reach Denver by noon tomorrow," Kade said, breaking the silence of the day. "I can take you to a respectable boarding house and help you get settled before your meeting." "Thank you." Willa's voice was small. "Willa." He stopped what he was doing and looked at her. "I am sorry for what I said last night. It came out wrong. Did you mean it? Some of it. But not the way it sounded." Kade moved around the fire to sit beside her, close but not touching. "The truth is, I do have feelings for you. That is what scares me." Willa's heart leaped. "Why does it scare you?" "Because I am not good at keeping people safe. I couldn't save my brother. I have not been able to face my nephew. I am so afraid that if I let myself care about you, I will fail you too." His voice roughened. "And I could not bear that. Oh, Kade." Willa reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "You cannot protect everyone from everything. Your brother's death was not your fault. My head knows that. My heart is still learning." They sat in silence, hands clasped, watching the fire burn down. Finally, Kade spoke again. "Tell me what happens after tomorrow, after you meet with your publisher." "I do not know exactly. If he accepts my work, I suppose I will need to stay in Denver for a while to work with him on the publication. After that, I might return to Boston or I might stay out west." She squeezed his hand. "I have not planned that far ahead. What do you want to happen?" Willa turned to look at him, at this man who had protected her and challenged her and shown her parts of herself she had not known existed. "I want to see where this leads us, these feelings between us." "Willa, I have nothing. No land, no home. I work for wages and move from job to job." "I do not care about that. You should. Your father is a banker. You are used to comfort and security." "My father's security felt like a cage," Willa said firmly. "I did not cross a continent to recreate the life I left behind. I came looking for something real, something true, and I found it with you." Kade closed his eyes. "You do not know what you are asking for. Then tell me what a life with you would look like." "Hard work. Uncertain income. Moving from place to place following the cattle drives. Sleeping under the stars more often than in a bed, going without sometimes." He opened his eyes and met her gaze. "But also freedom, open spaces, the chance to live on our own terms." "That sounds like poetry to me," Willa said softly. "You are serious about this?" "Yes." Kade reached up with his free hand and cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. "You are the bravest person I have ever met. I learned from a good teacher." This time, when he leaned in to kiss her, Willa met him halfway. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape and taste of the other. Then it deepened, weeks of tension and longing pouring into the connection. Willa's hand came up to clutch his shirt, holding him close, and Kade's arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kade rested his forehead against hers. "I do not deserve you," he murmured. "Let me decide what you deserve." Willa kissed him again, softer this time. "I choose you, Kade Thompson, whatever that means, wherever it leads." "Then I choose you too." He pulled back to look at her seriously. "But we do this right. You meet with your publisher tomorrow, you see what opportunities come from that, then we talk about the future." Agreed. They spent the rest of the evening talking, really talking, about dreams and fears and possibilities. Kade told her about the land he had always wanted to own, a small ranch where he could raise cattle and horses and build a life. Willa shared her hopes for her poetry, her desire to capture the West in words that people back east could understand. "Maybe we can have both," Kade said. "A ranch and your writing. They are not mutually exclusive." "I like the sound of that," Willa admitted. "I like the sound of we." That night they sat close together by the fire, Willa's head resting on Kade's shoulder, his arm around her waist. The stars wheeled overhead, bright and eternal. Tomorrow would bring Denver and publishers and decisions. But tonight they had this moment, perfect and complete. The morning of the 7th day dawned clear and bright. They broke camp early and rode into Denver as the city was waking up. It was a bustling place, full of energy and growth. Brick buildings lined wide streets. Wagons and carriages moved in ordered chaos. People in city clothes hurried about their business. Kade led Willa to a respectable boarding house on a quiet street and helped her secure a room. Then he insisted on accompanying her to Horace Whitman's publishing office, carrying her bag of manuscripts. "I will wait outside," he said when they reached the modest building that housed the press. "You could come in," Willa offered, suddenly nervous. "This is your moment. You do not need me for this." Kade squeezed her hand. "But I will be right here when you come out, whatever happens." Willa took a deep breath and went inside. The reception area was small but neat, walls lined with bookshelves filled with volumes bearing Whitman's imprint. A clerk directed her to an office in the back where a portly man with kind eyes and impressive mutton chops rose to greet her. "Miss Patterson, I am so glad you made it safely. I was beginning to worry." Horace Whitman shook her hand warmly. "Please sit. Tell me about your journey." For the next hour, Willa forgot her nervousness as she discussed her work with someone who truly understood it. Whitman had read the manuscripts she had sent ahead, and he was enthusiastic about her voice and vision. He asked about specific poems, questioned her choices, pushed her to explain her meanings. "You have something special here, Miss Patterson," he said finally. "A fresh perspective on the West, but also a universal quality to your observations about life and love and finding one's place. I would very much like to publish a collection of your work." Willa's heart soared. "Truly, truly. It will not make you rich, I am afraid. Poetry never does. But it will get your voice out into the world." He pulled out a contract. "I can offer you a small advance and a percentage of sales, and I would like to work with you to develop future collections as well." They spent another hour going over details, discussing timelines and editing processes. When Willa finally emerged from the office, her head was spinning and her heart full. She had done it. Her dream was coming true. Kade was leaning against a post outside, his hat pulled low, but he straightened immediately when he saw her face. "Well," he asked. "He wants to publish my work." "A whole collection." Willa could not keep the joy from her voice. "It is really happening." "Of course it is. I told you he would be a fool not to." Kade smiled, genuine and warm. "Congratulations, Willa." She wanted to throw her arms around him but restrained herself on the public street. "There is more. He wants to discuss future collections, which means I will need to stay in Denver for a while, and he suggested I write more about the West, about real experiences and real people." "That makes sense. You write what you know now." "I know you," Willa said softly. "I know this journey. I know what it feels like to trust someone completely and to discover strengths I did not know I had." Kade's expression softened. "When do you need to start working with him?" "In a few days. I need to review edits and make some revisions." She hesitated. "What about you? Will you stay in Denver for a while?" "I need to visit my sister-in-law, see my nephew." Kade glanced down the street, then back at her. "After that, I do not know. I was thinking maybe it is time to stop drifting, to find a place and put down roots. Here in Denver, maybe, or nearby. There is good ranching land in the area. He took her hand, propriety be damned. If I had a reason to stay. You have a reason, Willa said firmly. Me. Kade's visit to his sister-in-law happened that same afternoon. Willa accompanied him to a neat house on the edge of Denver where a blonde woman in her late 20s answered the door with a toddler on her hip. Kade. Her eyes widened in surprise. Oh my God, Kade. Hello, Margaret. Kade's voice was thick with emotion. I am sorry it has been so long. Margaret threw one arm around him, the toddler squashed between them, tears streaming down her face. You are here. You are finally here. The little boy, Daniel's son, looked at Kade with solemn blue eyes. He was perhaps 2 years old with his father's coloring and build. Kade stared at him, and Willa could see the pain and longing and love warring on his face. This is William, Margaret said, wiping her eyes. Billy, this is your Uncle Kade. Uncle, Billy repeated uncertainly. Hello, Billy. Kade's voice was barely above a whisper. You have gotten so big. Margaret invited them inside, and they spent the afternoon catching up. Willa sat quietly, letting Kade reconnect with his family. She watched him relax by degrees, the guilt and grief easing as Margaret told him repeatedly that his brother's death was not his fault, that he needed to forgive himself. Daniel would not want you to spend your life punishing yourself, Margaret said firmly. He would want you to be happy. To live fully. I am trying, Kade said, glancing at Willa. I am learning how. Billy warmed to Kade over the course of the afternoon, eventually climbing into his lap and falling asleep there. Kade held his nephew with infinite gentleness, one large hand cradling the small head, and Willa's heart melted completely. When they finally left as evening approached, Margaret hugged Willa too. Thank you for bringing him back to us, she whispered. I do not know what you did, but you broke through to him in a way no one else could. He did that himself, Willa said. He just needed a reason. Over the next few days they fell into a rhythm. Willa worked during the days with Horace Whitman, revising poems and discussing the arc of her collection. Kade explored Denver and the surrounding area, talking to ranchers and land agents about opportunities. In the evenings, they had dinner together and walked the city streets, talking about everything and nothing. Kade also spent time with Margaret and Billy, building a relationship with his nephew that should have existed all along. Willa could see the healing happening, the way Kade's shoulders gradually lost their tension, how his smile came more easily. One evening, about a week after they had arrived in Denver, Kade took Willa to a small restaurant for dinner. Over steak and potatoes, he told her his news. I found some land, about 20 miles from Denver in good cattle country, enough for a small ranch with water and grass and room to grow. Willa's pulse quickened. That is wonderful. The owner is willing to sell at a fair price. I have been saving money for years, and I have enough for a down payment and some initial stock. He met her eyes. But before I commit, I need to know something. What, if you would consider sharing it with me, the land, the work, the life? Kade reached across the table and took her hand. I am asking you to marry me, Willa Patterson. Not because it is proper or convenient, but because I have fallen in love with you. Because you make me want to be the man you see when you look at me. Because I cannot imagine building a future that does not have you in it. Willa's eyes filled with happy tears. Yes, yes, I will marry you. You are sure, because it will not be easy building a ranch from nothing, living on the frontier. I am sure. She squeezed his hand. You are the verse my heart was missing, Kade. The piece of poetry I did not know I needed until I found it. I want to write our story together. Kade came around the table and pulled her to her feet, kissing her there in the restaurant while other diners smiled and applauded. When they finally broke apart, both were grinning like fools. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at Margaret's house, with Horace Whitman and his wife as witnesses along with Margaret and little Billy. Willa wore a simple but elegant dress of cream lace, and Kade wore his best suit, looking uncomfortable but handsome. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to support each other's dreams and face whatever came together. Margaret cried happy tears throughout the ceremony. Billy, serving as an enthusiastic if distracted ring-bearer, clapped and cheered at the kiss. Afterward, they all shared a meal Margaret had prepared, toasting the new couple with champagne. "To unlikely love stories," Horace said, raising his glass. "May they always find a happy ending." "To new beginnings," Margaret added, "and family finding its way back together." "To us," Kade said simply, looking at Willa with such love in his eyes that her breath caught. They spent their wedding night at a hotel in Denver, a luxury they allowed themselves before the hard work of building their life began. In the quiet darkness of their room, Kade held Willa close and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. For saving me, really. I was lost before you came into my life." "We saved each other," Willa corrected softly. "And now we get to build something beautiful together." The next months were indeed hard work. They moved onto their land, living in a tent while Kade built a small cabin with help from hired hands and neighbors. Willa learned to cook over an open fire, to help with the animals, to survive on the frontier. Her hands, once soft and suited only for holding a pen, grew calloused and strong. But she also wrote. Between chores and work, she captured their life in verse, sending new poems to Horace regularly. Her first collection was published to warm reviews, and orders came in steadily. She began to build a reputation as a poet who truly understood the Western experience. Kade proved to be a natural rancher, his years of working cattle serving him well. He was patient with the animals, smart about breeding and range management. The ranch grew slowly but surely. They bought more cattle, built better fences, improved the cabin into a real home. Margaret and Billy visited often, the little boy delighting in the animals and the wide, open spaces. Willa developed a close friendship with her sister-in-law, grateful for the guidance and support. Kade blossomed under the attention of his nephew, teaching Billy to ride and rope, passing on the skills his own brother had taught him. 2 years after their wedding, Willa gave birth to their first child, a son they named Daniel after Kade's brother. Holding the baby in his arms, Kade cried openly, overwhelmed by emotion. "I wish he could have met him," he said softly, looking down at the infant's peaceful face. "He knows," Willa said from the bed, exhausted but happy. "Somehow, I think he knows." Little Daniel was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Charlotte, after Kade's mother. The cabin expanded to accommodate the growing family. The ranch prospered. Willa's poetry collections continued to sell, bringing in extra income and, more importantly, fulfilling her creative spirit. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle that died and crops that failed. Money was sometimes tight, and the work was endless. But through it all, Willa and Kade faced each challenge together, their love deepening with each passing year. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Kade surprised Willa with a trip back to Jackson, Wyoming, retracing the journey that had brought them together. They left the children with Margaret and rode the familiar trails, camping under the stars like they had that first time. "You ever regret it?" Kade asked one night as they lay side by side, watching the constellations wheel overhead. "Giving up the chance for a comfortable life back east?" "Never." Willa rolled onto her side to look at him. "This is the life I was meant to live. You are the man I was meant to love." I knew it even then on that first journey, though I could not fully admit it to myself. "I knew it too," Kade admitted. "Terrified me half to death. I kept trying to push you away, to convince myself it was just proximity and circumstance. But the truth was, I fell in love with you the moment you stood up after nearly being shot and insisted on going after your dreams anyway. We were both running from something back then," Willa mused. "You from your grief, me from my cage. We found each other at exactly the right moment." "The universe has good timing," Kade agreed. He pulled her close, kissing her deeply. "Happy anniversary, wife. Happy anniversary, husband." They made love under the stars, their passion still as fierce and tender as it had been in the beginning. Afterward, Willa lay in Kade's arms and composed poetry in her head, verses about enduring love and chosen paths and finding home in another person. When they returned to the ranch, Willa's second book of poetry was waiting, fresh from the publisher. This collection focused entirely on their life together, from the journey to Denver through the building of the ranch and the birth of their children. Horace had titled it Western Hearts, and it proved to be her most successful work yet. Letters came from readers all across the country, women especially who said her words spoke to their own experiences of love and hardship and finding strength they did not know they possessed. Willa answered as many as she could, grateful that her voice was reaching people and making a difference. Years passed in a blur of seasons and work and love. Daniel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy with his father's quiet strength. Charlotte was bold and adventurous, afraid of nothing. A third child, a son named Thomas, arrived when Willa was 30, rounding out their family. The ranch thrived. Kade expanded their holdings, buying adjacent land as it became available. They built a larger house, a proper rancher's home with room for their growing family and frequent visitors. Margaret eventually remarried, a kind school teacher who loved Billy as his own, and they settled permanently in Denver, close enough for regular visits. Willa continued to write, producing collections every few years that chronicled their life and the changing West. She became a respected voice in Western literature, invited to give readings in Denver and even, eventually, back in Boston. Her parents, who had been horrified at first by her choices, gradually came to accept and even take pride in her success. On a warm spring day when they had been married for 10 years, Willa sat on the porch of their ranch house watching Kade teach Daniel and Charlotte to rope fence posts. Thomas, still a toddler, sat on her lap playing with a carved wooden horse his father had made him. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still snow-capped despite the season. Kade looked up and caught her watching, his face breaking into the smile that was reserved just for her. He said something to the children and walked over, settling onto the porch step beside her chair. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, reaching up to take Thomas from her so the boy could toddle after his siblings. "How lucky I am. How right this all is." Willa took his hand. "Do you remember that night on our first journey when you said words are powerful things?" "I remember." "I have been thinking about that lately, about how sometimes the most powerful words are not the ones written on a page, but the ones we live." She squeezed his fingers. "You are my favorite poem, Kade, the one I get to experience every single day." Kade's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "And you are mine, the verse my heart needed, even when I did not know I was looking for it." "That is good," Willa teased gently. "I might steal that line for a poem, steal away. Everything I have is yours anyway." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their children play and their cattle graze, and the sun paint the sky in shades of gold. This life they had built together, born from a chance meeting on a dusty street and nurtured through a dangerous journey, was better than anything Willa could have imagined back in her Boston bedroom writing secret poems by candlelight. She had dreamed of adventure and found love. She had sought her voice and found her home. And she had discovered that sometimes the best stories are not the ones we plan, but the ones that unfold when we are brave enough to step into the unknown. Years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to their story. The children grew and eventually had families of their own. Daniel married a rancher's daughter and took over more responsibility for running the ranch. Charlotte married a journalist and moved to San Francisco but visited often with her own children. Thomas became a veterinarian, settling nearby and caring for animals throughout the region. Willa's hair turned gray, then white. Her hands grew twisted with arthritis, making writing more difficult, but she persisted, her love for language undiminished. Kade's body showed the wear of decades of hard labor, but his smile remained the same, and his love for her never wavered. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends, they renewed their vows. Kade was 66 now, Willa 63, but they held hands like newlyweds as they repeated the promises they had made 4 decades earlier. To unlikely love stories, Horace said, raising his glass. He was elderly now but still sharp, still publishing, still championing Willa's work. To new beginnings, Margaret added. She and her husband sat with Billy, now a grown man with children of his own, all of them part of the extended family that had grown from tragedy and loss into something beautiful. To us, Kade said, just as he had 40 years before, looking at Willa with eyes that still held the same love and wonder. That night, alone in their bedroom, Willa showed Kade the book she had been working on secretly for the past year. It was a memoir of their life together, woven with poetry and prose, the story of how a frightened poet and a grieving cowboy found each other and built a life neither had thought possible. "I am calling it the verse my heart was missing," she said, "because that is what you are. What you have always been." Kade read the manuscript slowly, his reading glasses perched on his nose, occasionally pausing to wipe his eyes. When he finished, he set it down carefully and pulled her into his arms. "It is perfect," he said hoarsely. "Just like you, just like this life we have lived." "Not perfect," Willa corrected. "Real. Messy sometimes, hard sometimes, but always true." "That is the best kind of perfect," Kade agreed. The book was published the following year and became Willa's most celebrated work. It struck a chord with readers of all ages, a testament to enduring love and the courage to follow one's heart. Copies were bought for weddings and anniversaries, read at ceremonies and celebrations. Willa and Kade spent their remaining years much as they had spent all the others, together on their ranch, surrounded by family and the land they loved. They sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching sunsets paint the mountains in impossible colors. They told stories to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren about the old days, about cattle drives and poetry readings, about a journey across Wyoming that changed everything. Kade died peacefully at 73, his hand in Willa's. His family gathered around. His last words were, "Thank you for saving me, for showing me how to live again." Willa followed him 3 years later at 76, her final volume of poetry completed just weeks before. She was buried beside him on a hill overlooking their ranch, the mountains standing guard in the distance. Her gravestone bore her name and dates, and below them, a simple inscription. She wrote her own story. Their ranch continued through the generations, still run by their descendants. The house became something of a landmark, with visitors occasionally coming to see where the famous poet had lived and written. Her books remained in print, teaching new generations about love and courage and the wild American West. But perhaps the greatest legacy Willa and Kade left was not the ranch or the books, but the example they set. They showed that it is never too late to change your life, to take a chance on love, to be brave enough to step off the prescribed path and forge your own. They proved that sometimes the best poetry is the kind you live, and the greatest adventure is the one you share with someone who sees your heart clearly. Their children passed down the story of how they met, the tale growing richer with each retelling. How a bullet brought them together. How a journey made them fall in love. How they built something beautiful from courage and hope and stubborn determination. And in libraries and bookstores, on the shelves of people who loved poetry and romance and stories about the American West, Willa's words continue to speak. Her verses about love found in unlikely places, about strength discovered in hardship, about two souls that found each other against all odds and held on tight. The verse "My heart was missing" remained her most popular work, read at weddings and anniversaries, quoted in letters and speeches. The story of the poet and the cowboy became legendary, a reminder that the best love stories are not fairy tales but real experiences lived by real people who chose each other every day, through every challenge, until the very end. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, two souls found each other again. A cowboy with gray eyes and a gentle smile. A poet with words that could capture the ineffable magic of love and life. Together still, as they had been from the moment their paths crossed on a dusty street in Jackson, Wyoming in the spring of 1885, their story complete, their love eternal. The verse, at last, finished to perfection,